Hi everyone, thank you for joining us today. My name's Connor, I'm a CBT therapist and I work at Caroline Eating Disorder Service. Caroline Eating Disorder Service has been around for 28 years and I'm joined by Jess today, and we're going to be talking together about the experience of therapy during the pandemic, both from a client and from the therapist's perspective. So I'll just hand over to Jess just to introduce herself.
Hiya, so my name's Jess. I'm a service user of Caroline. So I used Caroline for my eating disorder, which was bulimia and binge eating disorder. And I had a year's worth of therapy from Caroline, both outside of the pandemic and during the pandemic. And yeah, I just wanted to give my perspective on having treatment, how it went for me both in and outside of the pandemic, and how recovery is going since then. Yeah.
Thank you, Jess. And Jess has been really kind to sort of share her experiences with us in both the what it was like during therapy in session in person and online via sort of Microsoft Teams, where we conducted therapy on that format. So we're going to be talking about, I suppose, the different perspectives of or our perspectives, and I suppose the differences and, or well, her experience during the pandemic itself. So should we start by just having a chat about what was kind of the main differences you found in regards to having therapy during a pandemic?
So obviously the main difference, that was obviously it was conducted over Teams and we were moving to a digital platform. So at first I did find it quite hard to accept that I wasn't going to be coming into Caroline's offices anymore to have my therapy. So I was a little bit skeptical at first about what was going to happen in regards to therapy, but when I eventually realised, you know, we wasn't going to come out of lockdown, and I was eager to get on with my treatment with the help of my therapist and whatever, we decided to, you know, carry on the CBT over the internet, and it actually turned out to be fine. Any sort of doubts that I had regarding being at home and doing it in my own space rather than the safe space of the offices, you know, there was ways in which we came around that.
And did you have sort of any anxieties, I suppose, about the quality of the therapy itself being conducted over this format rather than face to face?
Yeah, definitely did. Like, I didn't understand how, you know, coming to an office and sitting physically with someone in the environment of therapy, taking that aspect away, I was concerned that it wouldn't work. But, you know, I was determined. The stage where I was in my therapy, you know, it was quite in the middle of my plan. So I was very keen to carry on, and I knew I had to adapt regardless. Otherwise, you know, I didn't know where that would leave me in regards to my journey. So I was skeptical about the quality, but I don't think that, you know, there was nothing that was compromised that I can see. When it turned out that everything that was happening in the meetings could have easily happened online over Teams. So I was quite, after a couple of conversations and sessions, I come to realise that actually it was quite nice doing it in the comfort of my own home.
Yeah. And I think from my perspective as well, I've had similar anxieties too. The reason why I said that is because this is the first time I've sort of delivered therapy over the format on sort of this online format. And it's kind of similar to what you're saying, kind of like not having that face-to-face felt like perhaps the quality that I could give of therapy itself might have been diminished in some way or another. Even though I couldn't quite put my finger on it, there's something I think about having someone face-to-face rather than, I suppose, at this element, there's that boundaries kind of looking at a laptop screen as opposed to having someone in the room with you. So yeah, I also found it prior to sort of starting it, I was a bit anxious about it, but then I think shortly afterwards, realizing actually you could still sort of deliver and sort of conduct therapy in the same sort of format and sort of see the benefits of it as well.
Yeah, definitely. And obviously, like, body language and just physical presence just plays a massive part in that support from a service user's point of view. Having somebody physically sitting in front of you and you can feel their presence, you know, that was the bit that I missed the most. But actually being surrounded by my own things and my own comfort straight after therapy sessions was actually really comforting, because you know, after my therapy, I used to get in my car and drive home, and sometimes I'd be pretty upset after the session, you know, things that we'd been talked about or done that had upset me, and it'd be quite an upsetting car ride home sometimes. Whereas doing it from home, if I did have anxieties or I was upset after the session, I was in my own house, I was surrounded by my own things, surrounded by people that I love who were there to chat to straight away. So, you know, there were swings and roundabouts to both sides of it, really.
Yeah, that's a good point too, in terms of, and I like what you said earlier about that sort of safe space, the safe space environment. And I suppose going back to, I suppose, anxieties, that's another anxiety that I had, where we could provide that safe space. We couldn't always provide that safe space for individuals when they'd be having therapy remotely. But it's also quite interesting too, in terms of what you're saying, in terms of after the therapy itself, where you're kind of like in that safe environment, or being able to place yourself in a safe environment, or having sort of friends or family surround you after the therapy session itself.
Yeah, I think it as well for me, I was quite lucky because I only live with my partner, but I know maybe for other service users, they haven't got that, you know, they're in a house full of other people. So conducting therapy at home might feel quite limiting for them. So I didn't want my partner to be at home when I was having my therapy sessions, just because sometimes it's hard for them to hear what you're saying, and you can't fully, you know, open up when, you know, your mum's downstairs or your boyfriend's next door. So for me, I got around that by, you know, just asking my partner, do you mind doing the shopping for that hour when I've got therapy on that day? Or, you know, I was quite lucky, it was in summertime that I had my online sessions mostly. So do you mind going for a walk for an hour? And obviously, if your family do know about the situation that you're going through, and they'd be quite happy to let you have your time, from my experience. But obviously it's concerning that some people might not have that. So, you know, it's important to try and make your sessions in time frames when, you know, you might be on your own, but if that's what you need, if you're concerned about them sort of things.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's a really good point as well. Sometimes people might not realise that we're talking about sort of safe spaces and things like that. And even if you're in a room, is that really going to be a safe space if there's people that can hear, or especially if, as you mentioned, your family, whether they know or whether they don't know, because sometimes, especially with eating difficulties, as we sort of spoken about before, it can be a very kind of like taboo topic, a very sort of secretive topic. So that what's supposed to be a safe space in your own house might not actually be that safe. So it's worth sort of considering, and it's really nice to hear that you sort of had that quite a positive experience, sort of being able to work remotely or have the sessions remotely, and sort of factor in your own sort of safe space, or build that sort of safe space to what suited you best for this experience.
Yeah, definitely. Like for me as well, after the sessions, just being at home and doing things that I'm comfortable with at home was really a nice like end to the session. And whether I was set any tasks or homework to do for the next session, you know, I was at home straight away and I could do it there and then. And then, yeah, I found it quite nice to wind down after the session at home, rather than when I'd be coming in to Caroline for therapy, to the actual physical therapy built where the therapy was. That drive home, although it was only half an hour, was quite a manic drive home. You know, I'd want to try and speak to someone, you know, my mind was racing. So it was quite nice to actually be at home straight away.
Yeah. And mentioning actually about other out of session tasks too, did you find that working sort of whilst the lockdown was going on, that the out of session work kind of was affected in any way at all compared to when there wasn't a lockdown?
Only in the sense that some of the tasks, like picking, for me and my particular journey, you know, I had to pick food off if I was going out for dinner, you know, I'd have to look at the menu before I was going and picking food. So them aspects of the recovery I'd done, but I only had to do for a short amount of time because the lockdown affected that. They were the only things, like tasks that were set for me in social situations, they were taken away from me, but I don't think it hindered my recovery. If anything, taking social aspects away benefited it in some ways, but then obviously when the lockdown was lifted again in the September, October time, I then had to deal with them social situations very towards the very end of my therapy rather than towards the beginning and middle. So I think it kind of threw it into a bit of a, I don't know, a order it shouldn't have really been in, but it definitely didn't hinder the process. If anything, it just made me more prepared for it because it was towards the end. But the actual like physical written tasks or whatever, I don't feel like they were hindered at all. I think I had more time alone to think about them rather than, you know, being busy of an evening with other things. So if anything, I probably put more quality into the homework rather than, yeah, because, you know, I wasn't having all these social events or whatever that I'd had in the past, social things to do. I did have to sit down and really think about it. So I think for me, I can't say the same for other service users, but for me, the lockdown was beneficial in quite a few ways to my therapy.
So if I've got this right, then it sounds like it was beneficial, one in the sense that I suppose you have more time to work on yourself in terms of the cognitions, and making changes.
Yeah.
And then I suppose the other thing as well is, oh, I forgot what I was going to say now.
No, but yeah, with it had more time to work on it, but it also left me with more time for the thoughts to fester and, you know, like body checking and things. I had to make a really conscious effort to, because I was at home more, to, you know, avoid them situations. Like obviously I work for the NHS, so I was busy at work. I didn't have time, but as soon as I come home, things that I'd usually do, like, you know, see friends, whatever, on the weekend, go see family, things like that. When they took that element away, I had to make a really strong conscious effort to not fall back into those negative actions that were impacting my life so much, and I was working so hard to get rid of. The lockdown probably could have worsened them. Maybe it would have been easier if we were out of lockdown to avoid body checking and stuff, but I definitely think when the lockdown first came in, I did find that, you know, I was body checking a bit more than I used to. So, you know, I got rid of all my mirrors, which was part of my plan for my therapy, which was what we discussed about taking mirrors out of the situation. And yeah, I think I spent the whole of summer with no mirrors in my house, and it worked. I don't body check anymore. So it was little adaptations like that really helped with the cognitive side of it, being at home a lot more than I would have been.
Right. Yeah. I suppose that's a good point too, where we're kind of like forced to be at home, especially sort of that period where they were saying don't go to work unless you have to, or don't leave the house unless you have to. You're physically kind of like, well, not physically, but we're forced to like stay at home, spend more time, or as you just said as well, in the house. Perhaps that might have been filled with mirrors.
Yeah.
So it sounds that you sort of, when you said you made that sort of conscious effort to kind of like remove the mirrors, or reduce the amount of mirrors in your house, you kind of worked, I suppose, those anxieties, the body checking increasing, and found sort of problem solved to kind of overcome the difficulty, the triggers, and progress forward with the therapy side of things.
Yeah, but that was like obviously with the help of you as my therapist, because, you know, this was going to be part of the plan anyway, because I did have too many mirrors in my house for a normal person. But it was an adaptation specifically for me, but it was also very helpful in the lockdown, if that makes sense. And I would like advise that if people are watching this and they're struggling with body checking, particularly being stuck at home more. Like, get rid of the mirrors. You don't have to throw them away. Just put them somewhere, cover them, you know, take away things that trigger you. And that's what I had to do when I was at home more, because I did run away from it a lot when before the lockdown. Yeah, I was having therapy. Yeah, I was doing all these things, but I was still distracting myself with friends, family, and activities. When you take that element of life away from you, you really do have to spend time alone, and that was what I wasn't going to let my difficulties win. I was more determined than ever to prove that I could do it.
And a big part of therapy, and what you're just saying as well, is kind of the absence of those activities. What we sort of talk about in therapy, or in the protocol that we use, is about trying to find other activities.
Yeah.
And that's been quite hard during lockdown itself, because we also know that finding sort of social activities and social events can be more beneficial than any sort of events without that element.
Yeah.
How did you kind of find, because you sort of started off face-to-face before the lockdown, and then transitioning from when you might have had these activities to going into lockdown and not being able to use those activities or access those activities. How did you kind of find that process?
That was quite hard, because obviously one of like exercise classes and things like that were my activity of keeping me away, you know, not obviously heavy exercise, but yoga, things like that. And I quite enjoyed, you know, group things with people. So, you know, ukulele, things like that. Obviously, when that all finished, you know, you miss that social aspect of it. So sitting at home and doing yoga isn't the same as going to a class with a lovely studio and a soft-spoken yoga teacher. So that was quite difficult to adapt things that made me happy to home life. I found as well this whole hour of exercise that they announced was actually quite triggering, because I felt like the only time I could leave the house was to exercise. So I then started using that hour to run. And as much as I'm like, running was great, but I was using it for the wrong reasons. I wasn't enjoying myself. I was doing it because I felt like I had to, because somebody was telling me, if you leave the house, you've got to exercise. So that was quite hard as well, because usually I'd leave the house just to walk around the shops and, you know, just browse shopping or go, you know, book shops, things like that. When that element's gone, like, what you do? Oh, I've got an exercise. So yeah, I found running was good, but I was probably doing it a bit too much for the wrong reason. So again, realizing that and stopping it in as part of my recovery.
Yeah, and it's a big point as well. So going back to, I suppose, the beginning, that first major lockdown, wasn't it, last year? Last year. And you're right, what they were saying is the only time you can leave your house is for exercise. So it's kind of like reinforcing a very difficult kind of like trigger for some people, heating difficulties. How did you, because you mentioned about that it did cause some distress about that sort of hour exercise. How did you kind of like transition or move away from that distress?
So for me, a big realization in my recovery that exercise should be enjoyable. It shouldn't be torturous. You know, you shouldn't leave an exercise class like absolutely exhausted. Like, it was understanding exercise can be going for walks. And, you know, if I'm quite lucky that where I live, there's quite a lot of walking spots. So instead of, you know, running with music in my ears, trying to beat a personal best, I started walking, looking for new trails and, you know, finding new walking things to do, which I enjoyed more. I was still getting my exercise. I was still feeling good. I was moving my body. I felt good about myself. So it was that transition that exercise should be enjoyable, not it should be something that you feel like you've got to do to maintain a weight, or, you know, you can't eat this unless you've done this many miles, which is an old mindset that I was very much stuck in. Yeah. So it was, you know, using exercise for a different part of life, basically, and actually enjoying it, which that's what I done.
And it sounds almost like it's reframing that kind of like notion, not the fact that it's exercise itself, but when you went out, it's more for like the enjoyment of walks, or I suppose spacing yourself from being stuck inside. Because it was a lot of that at the beginning. Just get inside, and some people might find that really difficult to stay inside. And then if they're sort of, I suppose, given the option to go outside but only for exercise, that itself can be quite challenging and quite tough. So it's quite nice what you said in terms about reframing that into like enjoying yourself outside, or for going for a stroll outside, or for a walk outside, or finding some nice spots outside.
Yeah, definitely. That's what I had to do, because running was good, but I wasn't, you know, taking the scenery, like find a tree that, you know, could be growing in your area, go and find the tree. Like, I know it sounds geocache, there's an app called geocaching where you can find, like, you know, a lot of people were playing Pokemon Go. I even give that a go at one point. Like, there's a lot of activities like that you could have done, which again, you're still getting your hours exercise, you're still in government guidelines, but it's just framing exercise for a different
the focus is different. Exactly. And in regards to, I suppose, any other limitations that arise or that have arose, well, let me rephrase that. So we've spoken a bit about, I suppose, having that difficulty with safe space, like working from home, the difficulty with activities and stuff like that. Has there been anything else that you noticed sort of in that kind of like transition period, or going from having sessions face to face and then having sessions kind of remotely, that may have impacted, you think, the quality of the sessions or the sessions themselves? Made things, whether it might have been harder, more challenging, or I suppose even the opposite, if it actually made it easier?
Well, I think for me, the weigh-in was one of the hardest things, because I'd obviously, for my therapy, I didn't have scale. Well, I had scales in the house, but they were hidden from me because I was obsessed with weighing myself. Sometimes I'd do it 3-4 times a day. So usually when I come to the face-to-face session, I'd be weighed by you, and that was that. And that was the only time. So I had to then start weighing myself at home again, which was hard. That was hard. And then obviously I knew the scales were there, and I think that was probably one of the things, that the support part of it, in the sense that we'd go into a room, weigh it, and we'd leave the room and go and do therapy. Even though I'd weigh myself before the session, sometimes it'd be first thing in the morning, because I had to be weighed when my partner was there, so he could then put the scales away, so I wouldn't. So yeah, sometimes I wasn't weighed exactly on the day I had therapy, and that would upset me. And, you know, that would be something that we talk about as to why it has upset me, because I was gaining weight. But I understand now why I needed to gain weight, obviously, and maintain a steady weight for my BMI and for my health. So I think that was probably one of the hardest transitions between the two. And I could see other people really struggling with that.
Yeah. And when did the anxieties kind of start to alleviate, if they kind of like were reduced in regards to the scales or the weigh-ins, and what kind of helped in that aspect?
Just the actual therapy itself, because I started to, as the therapy goes on, your mindset changes as to why you're doing it. Like, you know, at first it was every day I was getting up, and it was getting easier and easier to curb the thoughts that was controlling me by my eating difficulties. So from the CBT, from retraining my brain, eventually, you know, as the weeks were going by, it didn't bother me what the scale said. What bothered me was I had more energy, you know, my hair was growing back, I wasn't as tired anymore, I was starting to feel more bubbly and happy, because, you know, I wasn't starving all the time. So yeah, the number on the scales might have been changing, but I was changing for the better. So eventually I started to, you know, realize it didn't matter what that scale said. Nobody cares about what that scale says other than me. So, and I don't care what anybody else's scale says. So why am I bothered about what my one says? And that was with therapy. That wasn't just something I realised on my own. That was something that was being discussed weekly with the therapist. So yeah, as time goes on, it gets easier to, like, now it doesn't bother me at all. And obviously just accepting natural fluctuations, like, you know, as a woman, my weight can fluctuate massively from day to day, depending on where I am in my cycle and things like that. And just coming to realise them things helped. But again, that's something I couldn't have done on my own. It was the CBT that helped me realise that.
Yeah, and it's an interesting point as well, though, because even though having the therapy, having it in one environment, I suppose kind of like conditions you to that environment. As you said, you go into a room, you leave that room, or having it in a building outside your house, and then having to have it sort of inside your house as well. But it sounds like through the exposure work that we did as well, that we know anxiety will start to go down over time.
Yes, I'm not gonna lie, it was hard, like seeing sometimes the scale getting bigger and you're at home, you know, and the toilet's there and, you know, you can get away with it. There was the urge to be sick. I'm like 100% not going to deny that. The urge was there to go and, you know, but from CBT, you know, you learn to deal with it and think, no, this isn't right. And obviously as the weeks went by, as I said, it got easier to be like, it's just a number, who cares, you know. Yeah. And eventually that number just stopped changing and I got to a weight where my body's happy and this is my natural weight, and I've maintained this weight for, well, a year, maybe nearly 9 to 10 months now. And, you know, I'm not restricting myself. I eat all food groups, you know, I exercise when I want to exercise and for the right reasons. So yeah, this is me naturally, and I'm happy with that now. And I wouldn't have got to this stage if it wasn't for the CBT.
That's it's really nice to hear, actually, in terms of like progression, what it was like, the anxieties, the urges and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then the progress you've made as well. What would you say was kind of like the most benefiting thing in terms of the treatment? And then in a sort of question following that, do you think the lockdown might have interfered with that, the benefit you're getting out of it, or it either interfered or made it better or made it easier?
I think the most beneficial thing from it was just learning the skills that therapy teaches you to deal with the eating disorder, because I'm not going to lie, I don't think there's no cure to it. What you're taught in therapy is you're taught how to handle it and to acknowledge it, and, you know, you basically get your life back. And that was probably the main benefit for me, was I've got these skills now, I've got this toolbox, and when anything breaks down again, I've got the tools to fix it. And it gave me my life back. Like, I was so consumed by my eating difficulties. I never felt present. And to actually get to a point at this age, you know, this has been 10, 11 years of me abusing my body the way I have. I came to Caroline in September 2019. September 2020, I was discharged. I've lived the last so many months, you know, as me, as the person I was when I was 16, before my eating difficulties started to manifest and be a problem. And just gaining that tool to get back to that person is just, there's nothing compared to it. Like, you know, I've got a master's degree. I've done quite a lot academically and with my career, and nothing compares to the actual feeling of getting to this point and getting to it, like, quite, for me, what seems like a year of my life, which, considering how long this has been going on for, it's nothing in comparison.
And what would you say then about sort of the lockdown itself? Did that kind of make it easier? Did it make it harder?
I think, but in some ways it was easier, some ways it was harder. So the easier ways was social aspects, social things. One of my biggest triggers was social situations, and being around food in public and stuff like that. Some of them issues were taken away from me, so that side of it became easier to deal with. So that was a massive benefit for me, and having so much alone time, and not distracting myself with activities that are good. Don't get me wrong, distractions are amazing, but sometimes maybe I was distracting myself to not actually deal with it. So I did get alone time to think about it, but then obviously that was a massive benefit of lockdown. But there was loads of bad things about lockdown in regards, I couldn't see family, I couldn't see friends. Like when I was having a bad time, I'd had a particularly bad day, I was leaning on the same person, which was my partner, all the time. And it was hard, especially at the beginning of lockdown, when I didn't know whether I was coming or going with what I was getting out of my therapy, because I was putting a wall up, because as we discussed, I thought, oh, this isn't going to work, this isn't going to work. But it was, it was hard to be around food all the time, sitting close to the fridge, and knowing the toilet wasn't too far, and knowing I got away with it for so long. Why couldn't I just do it again? It was hard. You really have you're facing them head on. The thoughts, the patterns, everything when you're stuck in at home. So there was benefits to it. I wouldn't change my journey. I wouldn't change anything about the way I received my therapy. I think I had benefits of both doing it face to face and getting treatment that way, and then getting it both, at home as well over Teams. I don't think it hindered me progress. I still think it would have taken as long as it did. I don't think, I think it worked for me, and I'm happy with the therapy that I received, both in person and on Teams.
Yeah, and I can hear what you're saying in terms of it's a mix of positive and negative, I suppose, emotions that might arise, because it sounds like there's almost two extremes: the extreme of being able to avoid social situations, then also the extreme of being constantly flooded by the triggers, like the fridge, the toilet, and things like that. And what's really nice to hear is that you ever sort of challenge those triggers, challenge those urges, in order to overcome those distresses that arose there.
Yeah, you've definitely, when it comes to getting therapy, you've got to be, you've got to give it your all. And luckily, I was ready to get better. I'd been, I'd had difficulties for well over 10 years, and I was fed up by that point, and I had to give it me all. It's not easy, it's not, and I'm not gonna say that, but it's worth the battle, 100% worth the battle. The further and further it got along, the more everything made sense, and it didn't get easy. I'm not going to say the easier it got, but the more enjoyable it got, because the more it did, by the end of therapy, for me, by the end of the year of having sessions, I was ready. I remember actually when we were coming towards the end of therapy, I was getting really anxious about not speaking to someone weekly about what was going on, and then coming to the last few weeks of it, where I knew it was coming. By the end session, I was like, yeah, I'm ready. It was a nice transition to feel, go from, oh my God, I can't believe I'm not going to be speaking to somebody every week, to then by literally the last day, I was ready, I was prepared for it. So to go out on my own. But Caroline said to me, the charity said to me, there's a helpline, and that's there 24 hours a day. And if you do feel like, you're getting back into those ways, call us. And just knowing that number was there was just, it wasn't like we're cutting the cord, you're gone, that's it, see ya into the real world. There was still always, that little support barrier, that little hand that was on the back of your back, pushing you out, but still giving you that support that you need if need be. Because I can imagine a lot of people who maybe were having therapy, you know, the lockdown might have caused massive relapses. I did have lapses, not going to lie about that, but, you know, they just spurred me on to get to a better place, and I'm in that place now. Yeah,
and I suppose it's very common for lapses as well, and sort of we learn from those lapses too, don't we?
Definitely.
There's nothing wrong with those.
Nope.
What kind of advice, or sort of lastly then, what kind of advice would you give someone if they're feeling a bit anxious about doing sort of remote therapy or remote working? I mean, hopefully we're not going to be in this forever, and I mean, with sort of the end date's coming up soon. But particularly people that might be starting now, if there's any anxieties about any remote working or anything like that, do you have any advice for them?
Yeah, of course. I would just say, you know, just give it your all. Like, you know, you probably feel skeptical. I did, but give it your all. Make your little safe space for yourself. Make that your little therapy area. Move away from that area once you've done your session. You know, do something completely different. Don't sit in the same place. Close your laptop, switch your computer off, go for a walk, do an activity you enjoy. Like, don't be scared about doing it over Teams. It's actually not that bad. Like, you can make the best of the situation. The most important thing is you're taking the step to get better, no matter whether that's in person or it's on a computer. You know you're ready, and don't give up on yourself. Don't use it as an excuse to not get better. Like, you've got a whole life to live. Like, just start now. And I can't even explain what it's like to get into a place where your difficulty doesn't overcome you anymore, and you're in control of your life again. And whether it's on Teams, it's in person, it doesn't matter. Just go, just take the bull by the horns and go for it.
That's really, really nice advice, actually. Yeah, I really like that. Really good ideas. Yeah. So I think that's coming up to the end of the time today. Thanks so much, Jess, for your time and for sharing your experience. It's been really nice talking to you today and hearing, I suppose, your perspective about what it's been like in terms of your experience of working or having therapy remotely versus what it was like having it face to face.
Yeah.
And thank you everyone for listening.
Thanks.